from Mike, one question. You talked about some of the criteria and the market experience, and etc. Is there some information or data on understanding the criteria on which the corporations decide who to give money to or who to fund research to? And
the first thing that I would look at is the taxonomy that Hewlett-Packard has. I think it's a great suggestion. Maybe we can go to some of our industry partners and ask them that question, because I think different people will decide differently. For instance, we have a partnership with companies like Raytheon is probably one of our biggest partners. We know very specifically what they're interested in and have been doing for a long time. But we need to keep an eye on that now that they're going to be one and the same with United Technologies. So that's a bit of a moving target in my mind. We know for some of our partners what their research interests are, and we know who they're interviewing and
Mike, if I may,
who they're hiring.
Mike, if in order to just give our reviewers a little more time, I think both Doug and Denise have had interactions on the hiring and internship side as well as research collaboration. So Doug, would you like to add something, as well as Denise? And you're still on mute, Doug. You want to unmute before you talk. Yeah, there you go.
All right. Specifically, Swami, what was your point?
The question of, from your experience in terms of interacting with universities in general, your company, what do they look for, and how do you decide what's a good partner to partner with?
Well, first of all, I think there has to be a specific expertise or capability. If you're looking for an initiative starting from that end, I would say typically the initiative comes from the university side and accesses someone at the company. That's more how it's worked with Waters. The reality is that people in a corporation have a lot of things to do, and this kind of relationship isn't necessarily first on their list. So they need a prodding to work at it. It helps if the president or a senior executive has buy-in or has been anointing it. I think that's an important ingredient to these kinds of programs.
Denise, you have different types of interactions than from your industry. Again, you're on mute. You want to unmute. You're still muted. There you go.
There we go. Sorry. Yes, I mean, we have, in the hospitality industry, I think there were a couple of things that worked very well for the industry as it relates to the relationship with the university. One, there was a very specific applied degree that we had a direct entree into talent in the university. I think that when there was someone inside of a large organization, I mean, to Doug's point, when does it become a priority for someone inside the organization? Entry-level hiring, obviously, in the hospitality business was key for us to make sure that we had a good pipeline of talent. But having someone in the organization who had a previous relationship with the university was key. And then someone inside of the university, most specifically, it was either the dean or the head of the department, making sure that that relationship was maintained within the organization was the starting point. And then it was ease of use. It was the ease with which we were able to recruit on campus, get to know students from through either internships and then ultimately through employment. That caused us to continue to go back to the university or not. If the experience with the students or with the career folks was not a positive one, that certainly made us look elsewhere. I will say with HTM, it was always a very easy process, and we had you had very talented students, which we in the industry appreciated greatly.
Swami, if I could just add one thing to my comments. In all of these initiatives, one of the things I think that could be very important is the Newton campus, because the focal point of most of these corporate activities are Eastern Massachusetts, not Western. And driving processes that bring them into Newton, I think will be a lot easier than necessarily bringing them into Amherst.
So Suniti, just by way of background, recently we purchased a small old college campus in Newton, which is about 10 miles out from Boston. And Mike in his presentation was talking about the fact that we're in the rural part of Massachusetts and sufficiently away from the Boston and the activities there, that was an impediment. And what Doug is talking about is an opportunity we have here to reduce that barrier through interactions taking place right there on the Boston campus.
Great.
Doug, do you think this should be more prominent in our thinking?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I would, I mean, part of being successful at this is making it easier on the corporate entities.
Right.
And the more they appreciate that it's really easy to get to Newton, then once you have them there, you can probably prod them to Amherst if necessary. But I think the Newton approach is a lot easier.
Hey, Doug, this is Mark. What sort of, and to Denise as well, what sort of activities would you see happening at Newton that would really leverage that location and build that relationship?
Traditional seminars, internship fairs kind of thing, lecture programs. You can build on it, but it's too easy for somebody to say, "Oh, it's tough for me to get to Amherst on a Tuesday night." It's a lot harder to say that about getting to Newton, I think.
Right.
Yeah, and Mark, the only thing I would add to Doug's comment is I think to the extent that you think about programming at Mount Ida that includes the students, not only the potential interview process for internships, but if you're thinking programmatically, how might the students be actively engaged in that program such that the stakeholders who are Boston-based are actually seeing the level of talent and the skills of the students coming out of UMass Amherst.
Right, which would necessitate at some level a strong student present on that campus beyond just the occasional internship or job fair, but rather to have a bigger resident population where we could do that connectivity.
Yeah.
I want to come back to Suniti, especially as an outsider to the whole thing, your perspectives on what we presented as the particular change we're trying to accomplish, and your insights from the vantage point of an outsider would be very valuable. So I'll come back to you and then go through the reviewers.
Yeah, one of the thoughts I have is that also, in addition to the corporations, etc., also looking at the market demand and why corporations would be interested. For example, right now there's a huge shortage of data scientists all around, and I think corporations would be more interested in partnering with universities where you could have some special programs, or maybe have some special internships for summer that they can work with companies to build certain things. I work with a small company right now where I live in DC, so we are talking with Georgetown, for example, to see what some of their programs are and could we create more capacity and supply. But that's just an example, but maybe there are others I mean, you highlighted engineering and natural science, so those two areas. We all know AI is a big buzzword right now. So those
Right.
kind of things, I think, looking at the market demand and then creating a store, why corporations would be interested in you creating the pipeline for them to have people there.
Denise, insights in general, observations from the presentation, and in terms of the process we have set up for ourselves?
Yeah, I guess what I got myself hung up on a little bit is as I looked at, and I'm looking at the slide, Mike, that you have up. So as I looked at what must be done, and clearly the 5 steps made complete sense to me. But as I listen to you talk, it seems like there's a thought process that is somewhat sequential as you're looking at these 5 steps, which I understand you can only tackle so much at any point in time. Having said that, when I look at number 3 that says, campus culture of corporate engagement, this appears to me, as from an outside view, to be a pretty significant change initiative relative to how people think about corporate engagement across the campus and across the system. And I'm not seeing enough about cultural change at the beginning of this. I mean, I am seeing stakeholder engagement and bringing people along, but I think I would think about that cultural change right at the get-go and through every one of these steps. Because I think it's an enormous change initiative.
Right. You're absolutely correct. And in fact, Steve Goodwin, you may want to speak to what we've been doing over the last 12 months in terms of getting our academic programs aligned on the internship path. Are you there?
Yeah, so I can speak to that a little bit. So, and some of this was driven by our acquiring the Newton property, Doug, because we realized that, a lot of what corporations want to see are longer periods of time with our students, not just a summer internship, but, a co-op that lasts a semester and a summer or something like that. And the Newton campus really gives us the opportunity to allow students to come do internships and still be keeping up with their programs through coursework, whether it's face-to-face or online. And so, but what we needed to do is we realized that a lot of our academic units out there, they're so structured that there's not room for students to come in and do this. And so the provost has really been working pretty closely with all the academic units to help them understand the importance of these internships and co-ops, number 1. And 2, how do you make them a more integral part of the fabric of what your department is actually trying to do?
So Denise, in answer to your question, essentially we're taking, the Eisenberg School of Management model where they really emphasize 85–90% of everyone participating in internships throughout the campus. And so that culture change is underway in parallel. And so you're absolutely right. Without that, you really couldn't get this done. But that's got a 12-month lead already. And so a lot of the programs have gone through some academic changes.
Swami, in that regard, I noticed that in your implementation team, the Eisenberg Dean wasn't on that small group. And I think of Eisenberg as probably being the area that's most ahead in corporate engagement. So,
I noticed that too. You're absolutely correct. And that will be corrected. I think as a sort of a model to then take that and then see what's working there that we can spread to the other colleges. You're absolutely correct.
I would just note that to Denise's point, it's also some of the culture changes just because of the difference of location that we've been talking to. Out here in Amherst, we have, there's a limited business environment out here. And so people aren't always in the cultural mindset of thinking about those corporate connections, since we don't have the cross currents of all the business activity that we will have once we ramp up the Mount Ida campus.
Yeah, and Swami, I guess the other thing that I was thinking about from a cultural change perspective is, and I could be interpreting this wrong, but this appears to me, and appropriately so, that corporate engagement will now have a much more centralized focus on a go-forward basis for the purpose of better coordination, communication, for all the reasons you've outlined here. And what exists today is a pretty decentralized operation from a corporate engagement perspective. And I guess I'm focused on that cultural shift from a dean's perspective, from the school's perspective, sharing information and getting everyone to a place that they realize that this has a much better chance of success as it relates to getting to that 10% mark versus the decentralized model that you have now. And I see that as a pretty significant change.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Yeah, in most things, you know, when we go from centralized to, decentralized to central, that is in fact a big challenge. And so as we look at different models, you know, when the emphasis on key stakeholders comes particularly from making sure that we actually bring them along and try to allay their concerns, fears, because you're right. I mean, if you say HTM already has a really good relationship with the industry, we want to make sure that whatever we do doesn't screw that up. And I think those assurances are going to be important. Absolutely.
Swami, another comment for what it's worth is as this group goes through the initial processes, I wouldn't ignore some of the organizations like MassBio, the Mass High Tech Council, where you have a group of high value added executives sitting probably monthly to get your message across in some formal, targeted way.
Indeed, you're right. There are a lot of these quasi-government and industry associations that give us a platform for reaching out to all of them, and very much so. Thank you very much for that as well. Well, one quick point of clarification, the question came up earlier about, you know, why is our goal a percentage rather than a dollar number, is that we have really growth plans and targets for the total research volume as well. For example, as part of our top 20 drive, we want to go from our current 200 million to 300 million in about 5 years' time. And that correspondingly, we would also want to increase the industry portion. So that's the reason for trying to state that as a percentage from best practices rather than as a dollar figure per se.
So as long as it's binary, I suppose it's,
yes.
Because obviously you can make that percentage successful by just lowering the overall R&D.
Absolutely. No, that will not happen, sir. Indeed. So back to, you know, again, I'm just gonna keep going in circles and draw other points out. From our team members, are there particular questions or points on which you want the reviewers to either elaborate or you know, respond to? Because otherwise I'll go back to again another round. Yeah, Mark, sorry, I cut you off earlier.
So it's good. I can raise my hand virtually. So I'd like to pick up on Doug's statement about leveraging some of these collectives of industry leaders. And does he have a specific suggestion on how we might do that?
Well, I think particularly the Mass High Tech Council, it's populated almost exclusively by CEOs or C-suite individuals. It meets just about monthly. And, you know, just in terms of if you can get access to that group and you have a good message, you're important to the high-tech community, you know, you should get to the head of the High Tech Council, who's in, you know, many of us know, and say you want to get on their agenda, target your message, and you want to get on there, you know, like yearly. You want to be at the opening meeting in January or whenever it is, the state of the university and what we can do for you. And these things build over time. And I think the same thing with MassBio, and I'm sure there are other You know, the
Mhm.
hotel industry has similar kinds of meetings. It pays off in the long run, typically, not in the short run. But if you can get those kinds of high impact individuals to listen to your message, I think it's a good idea.
Thank you, Doug.
I'd like to come back and ask Suniti really quick. Did you have further thoughts on, you mentioned your question was about what criteria do corporations use when making these decisions? Do you have more thinking on that for us, Suniti?
You're on mute.
You're muted. You're on mute.
Sorry. So sometimes corporations also have their strategic goal of some, whether they want to increase their community service or they want to increase their, diverse their recruiting across multiple campuses. Sometimes they want to grow in one particular business line that they haven't grown before. So that's what I mean is that,
Okay.
they also have criteria based upon where they want to grow. And then if you can align with their criteria, then it's easier to make the match.
Great. Thank you.
Attention.
Great.
Excellent point. Thank you. So Ryan, you as our consultant from IntelliVen haven't said anything so far. Are we on track? What have we not asked? What have the reviewers not addressed yet?
That's a great question. I think you're on track. It sounds like because of the lack of questions about the structure of the briefing that it tends to make sense to people because most of the commentary has focused on
Right, so
substance of where things are going. So
Swami, I have one other comment, which goes more into your action and execution plan. But as you think about, you got the structure, you got culture that is hard to do. Oh, I guess we lost.
Go ahead,
No, you're here.
Go ahead and finish, Suniti.
Okay, quickly, I'll finish. Is that think about the timeline and what you want to accomplish. What I mean by that is, what's the corporate fiscal year? When is the time they have to make decisions to allocate funds? When do you want them to, if you want to have a plan for the next academic year, how early on do you need to start to get that goal achieved? So those kind of things, more on the execution side, but I just wanted to share.
No, important. Thank you very much. That's an excellent point. I guess from the fact that Peter appeared, I'm assuming we're running out of time, but
You're out of time, Swami, but good job.